Okay, coming to you live from my craft room, spare bedroom, whatever it is. Hi, everybody. I'm Jen. I'm the librarian at the Milledgeville Public Library, and I'm here to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you a folktale or a fairy tale. We're going to try to do this every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 3 o'clock on our channel. That's what we're going to try to do. I will also try to tell you ahead of time what story we're going to be telling so you can decide if you want to tune in or not. And hopefully we'll be telling stories from all over the world, and I'm hoping to do this the entire time we're all locked in our houses, quarantining ourselves from everybody else. Today, the story is going to be the story of Cinderella, as told or as recorded by the Brothers Grimm. Okay, I can see a couple people watching. Give me a couple likes and loves just so I know that you can hear me. Can you hear me? I hope you can hear me. Is anybody out there? Hi, Becca. Hi, Courtney. All right. We got a few people. This is awesome. Okay, so today's story is the tale of Cinderella, as recorded by the Brothers Grimm. And I have a little cheat sheet just so I don't forget anything, because it's been a while since I told stories. So, once upon a time, long, long ago, there was a nobleman and his wife, and they had a beautiful young daughter. Now, one day the wife got sick, and she knew she was dying after she had been sick for a while. So she called her daughter to her side and she said, "My beloved daughter, I love you so very much, and you are so very good and so very kind. Always be that good and always be that kind, and you will always be protected. I may not be here to hold your hand and to give you hugs, but I will always be watching over you." And of course, after a few days, the mother died, and the little girl was so very sad. She would go out every day to her mother's grave, and she would cry at her mother's grave because she missed her so very much. And she did that every single day. All through the winter, when the snow covered the ground, she would still go out there and talk to her mother and remember her mother. And then the spring came. The nobleman came home with a new wife and 2 new daughters. Well, his new wife and the 2 girls were very beautiful on the outside. On the inside, they were very cold and very cruel. And they decided that they didn't like the nobleman's first daughter, because she was not only beautiful on the outside, but she was beautiful on the inside too. And so they decided they didn't want her around because they didn't want to be reminded how cruel and cold they were inside, and they didn't want to change. And so they banished her. They sent her to the kitchen and they made her work as a scullery maid. She had to light the fires. She had to do some of the cooking. She had to do a lot of the cleaning. She had to do all of the laundry. She had to fetch the water. Did you know in those days they didn't have faucets? You had to take a bucket out to the well and fill it up, lower it down into the well, and haul it back up by the rope and bring it up. And then you had to bring it back into the house all heavy and wet and probably slopping water all over your feet and your pants or your skirts or whatever. And it was not a fun job. She had to do all of those jobs. And most nights, she was so tired that she didn't even bother to try to go to her little corner with a blanket on the floor to sleep. She just slept right on the fireplace, right in front of the fireplace in the ashes on the hearth, because it was warmer there and because she was just so tired. And sometimes when the stepmother and the stepsisters were feeling especially cruel, they would take a bag of dried peas and they would pour them into the ashes in the fireplace, and they would make her pick out all of the peas and wash them off and cook them for supper. Well, after a couple of years of this, the father had to go on a journey. And so he went to all of his girls and he asked them, "What would you like me to bring you back from my journey?" And the oldest daughter said, "Father, I would like beautiful gowns to wear." And the next daughter said, "Oh, Father, I would like beautiful jewelry to wear." And then he went to Cinderella and he said, "Cinderella, what would you like me to bring you?" And she said, "Father, I would like you to bring me a fresh hazel twig, the first one you brush against on your way home." All right. So the father went off on his journey. And while he was gone, he bought beautiful gowns for this daughter and beautiful jewels for the other daughter. And on his way home, he was just starting to leave the city where he had been, and his hat got knocked off of his head by the branch of a hazel tree. And he said, "Oh, what a good reminder." And he got down and he picked up his hat, and then he got up and he broke off that twig of that hazel tree to take back to Cinderella. And when he got back home, the oldest daughter put on her beautiful gowns, and she paraded herself in front of her mirror in her beautiful gowns. And the other daughter put on her beautiful jewels and paraded herself in front of her mirror, admiring her beautiful jewels. And Cinderella took that little hazel twig, and she went out to her mother's grave, and she planted it near her mother's grave. And when she would go out there, not every day anymore, she did have jobs to do, but she would go out to the grave, and she would cry at the grave, and her tears would water that tree, and it grew faster than any normal tree would. And pretty soon it was a little small tree, little hazel tree. And one day, a dove came flying along as Cinderella was sitting there crying at her mother's grave. This dove came flying out and landed in the tree, and it lived there. And from then on, whenever Cinderella would come to the tree, and she would say something like, "I'm so hungry. I wish I had a small roll of bread to eat," there would be a rustling in the tree, and there would be a roll of bread for her to eat. Or she would say, "I'm so cold. I wish I had a warmer blanket." And when she went home, after the rustling in the tree, she went home, there was a blanket in her corner waiting for her. Little wishes that she had were now being granted. Well, after a little while of this, one day, the king made a proclamation. His son, the prince, was old enough to marry, and he had to choose a wife. And what's the best way to choose a wife? Well, in those days, they thought it was throwing a party so that all of the young women could come and show off how pretty they were, how good they were, what a good dancer they were, whatever it was they had to show off. And they would come, and everybody would have a festival. They were going to have a festival. And that meant that the people who weren't, fancy enough or well-born enough to see the prince could still party too. Well, Cinderella found out about this festival, and she wanted to go. She's a nobleman's daughter, so she should be able to go, right? So she went to her stepmother, and she said, "Could I please go to the festival?" And her stepmother said, "Why on earth would you go to the festival? You're dressed in rags, you have nothing to wear, you're dirty. No, you may not go to the festival." Cinderella really wanted to go to the festival, so she didn't give up asking. She didn't pester, but every once in a while, when her stepmother was in a sort of good mood, she would ask her stepmother if she could go to the festival. And finally, one day, her stepmother said, "Well, fine. Here." She took a big bucket of peas, and she poured them into the fireplace, and she swirled around the ashes, and she said, "Fine, if you can pick all of those peas out of that bucket, out of those ashes, and put them back in the bucket in 1 hour, you may go to the festival." Well, Cinderella knew there was no way she was going to be able to do that. So she hurried out to the tree, and she said, I would really like to go to the festival, but my stepmother says I have to pick all of the peas out of the ashes in the fireplace and put them back in the bucket in 1 hour. And if I do that, she says I can go to the festival. Well, there was a rustling in the tree, and a flock of doves came down and picked all of the peas out of the ashes and put them in the bucket. And so Cinderella, an hour later, she went back to her stepmother and says, I did it. All of the peas are back in the bucket and out of the ashes. It's all done. And her stepmother said, I don't care if you did that. You have nothing to wear. You would disgrace us. You can't go. And she and the stepsisters left for the ball. Well, Cinderella knew what to do. She washed her face and her hands. She brushed her hair, so she was clean, and she went out to the tree. So I would really, really like to go to the ball, but I have nothing to wear and no way to get there. And there was a rustling in the tree, and suddenly, instead of her ragged dress and wooden shoes, Cinderella was wearing a beautiful gown. It was silver, and it shone as though it was made of stars. And instead of her wooden shoes, she was wearing soft, silvery slippers that matched her gown perfectly. And there was a rustling in the tree, and a voice said, "Don't forget to be home by midnight." And a carriage pulled up, drawn by 6 white horses, with a coachman and footman in silver and blue livery. And Cinderella got in, and she went to the ball. Well, when she arrived at the ball, she was so beautiful and so shiny from her dress that no one recognized her, not even her stepmother and her stepsisters. And the prince took one look at her and said, "She is beautiful. I want to dance with her." And so he took her and he danced with her, and they talked a little bit, and he realized she was a very beautiful girl, both inside and outside. And so he danced with no one but her all night long. But Cinderella heard the clock. She was paying attention. She heard the clock strike 1/4 to midnight, 11:45, and she slipped away. And when the prince turned around, she was just gone. And no one knew where she had gone, and they couldn't find her anywhere. And so the prince was sad. But there were 2 more days of festival left. And Cinderella went home, and when her stepmother and her stepsisters arrived home, she appeared to be sleeping in the fireplace as usual. Well, the next day, the stepmother and the stepsisters were all a-twitter about the mystery woman at the ball and how much fun they had had at the festival. And then they got dressed, and they went to the second night of the ball. Well, Cinderella, she went out to the tree. And she said, "I would really like to go to the second night of the ball, please." And there was a rustling in the tree, and suddenly Cinderella was dressed in the most beautiful dress, made entirely of pearls that glowed and shimmered like the moon at night. And her slippers matched, and the carriage pulled up, and the rustling and the voice said, "Don't forget to be home by midnight." And she got in the carriage and she went to the ball. Well, the prince had been waiting for her. And as soon as she arrived, he was so excited, he went over and he took her, and they went out and they danced all night long together. But Cinderella was listening for the clock. And when she heard the clock strike 11:45, 1/4 to midnight, she slipped away. And again, no one knew where she had gone. And the prince couldn't find her. And she went home. And when her stepmother and her stepsisters arrived home later, she appeared to be sleeping in the fireplace, in the ashes, as usual. Well, the next day, the stepmother and the stepsisters could talk of nothing but the mystery princess at the ball. Everyone was sure she would be back for the 3rd and final night of the ball, and they were sure that the prince would never let her go this time. Well, stepmother and the stepsisters finally left. And Cinderella washed her face and her hands, brushed her hair, and went out to the tree. And she said, "I would really like to go to the final night of the ball, please." And there was a rustle in the tree, and suddenly Cinderella was dressed in the most beautiful gown ever. It was a golden gown that shone as if it were made of pure sunlight. And she had golden slippers on her feet. And the horse and carriage pulled up, and the voice from the bush said, "Don't forget to be home by midnight." And she climbed in, and she rode off to the ball. She arrived, the prince took her hand, and he took her out, and they went dancing together all night long. And Cinderella was having so much fun that she forgot to listen for the clock. And suddenly she heard the clock start to strike midnight. And she ran as fast as she could out through the gardens, out down the drive, out onto the road and back home. Well, of course, she didn't make it home. And about halfway there, her clothes turned back into her ragged dress. Her shoes turned back into her wooden clogs. The only thing she had left was one golden slipper, because you see, as she was running through the garden, one of her slippers slipped off her foot. And it was making it kind of hard to run, so she took off the one slipper, and she held it in her hand, so when she changed back into her rags and her clogs, she still had one golden slipper to remember a beautiful 3 nights. Well, the prince, of course, chased after her as soon as she left the ball. And he chased after, but he just couldn't catch her. And she disappeared in the gardens. And he was standing in the garden thinking, I was having so much fun, I forgot to ask her name. And I don't know how to find her. And what am I going to do? I want to marry her. I'm in love with her, but I can't. Oh dear. And just then, he saw a glimmer in the grass. And when he bent down to pick it up, he found it was one of her golden slippers. So he went back to the castle. And the next morning, he talked with his father, the king, and they came up with a solution. This slipper, you see, was rather small. Cinderella had small feet. And the prince said, I think if I try this slipper on all of the women in the kingdom, the young maidens and such, not the really old ones, obviously they're not my princess, but maybe the young ones, I might find the girl whose foot fits in the slipper, and then I'll know if it's her. And his father said, well, I think that could be a good starting point. And so they made another proclamation. The prince is in love, and he will marry the girl whose foot fits in this golden slipper. And so they went out and started trying the slipper on every girl in the kingdom. Well, the stepsisters were so excited because, you see, like I said, they were beautiful on the outside, and they had very beautiful feet. And so they were so excited. Oh, we could marry the prince. Of course, they knew they weren't the ones who had worn the slipper, but we could marry the prince. So they went and they got ready. They cleaned their feet, they washed them very well, they put some perfume on them. Don't normally put perfume on your feet, but they were excited, so we'll let them do that. And when the prince arrived with the slipper, the oldest sister took the slipper. Now, you understand, in those days, you did not show your feet to a man you were not married to. And so she took the slipper to her bedroom to try it on. Well, she took the slipper to her bedroom, and she tried to put it on her foot, but her big toe was too big. She could put it on her heel, but she couldn't get her toes in. And she didn't know what to do. But then her mother came in to check on her, and she said, Mother, I can't fit my big toe into the slipper. Everything else fits, but not my big toe. And her mother said, well, I have a solution for you, my dear. Here's a knife. Cut off part of your big toe, because when you are the queen, you won't need to walk, so it won't matter. Okay, so she cut off part of her big toe, and she squeezed her foot into the slipper, and she went out to the prince. And he was ecstatic. He was so excited. Oh, good, your foot fits in the slipper. You must be my princess. And he took her out to his horse, and he put her up on his horse, and he started to go home with her. And as they passed the tree, there was a rustling in the tree, and a dove flew out, and it flew down, and it flew alongside the horse. And when the prince watched the dove fly, he saw the blood dripping out of the slipper, and he knew that this girl had tried to trick him. So he turned around and he took her right back to her father. Well, then her younger sister took the slipper, and she went to her bedroom to try it on after they washed it out. And she took it into her bedroom to try it on, and she put it on her foot, and her toes fit just fine, but her heel was too big. Just didn't quite fit. When her mother came in to check on her, and she said, "Mother, my heel doesn't fit. Everything else fits, but my heel doesn't fit." And her mother said, "I have a solution for you, my dear. Here's a knife. Cut off a part of your heel, because when you're the queen, you won't need to walk." And so she did. She cut off a part of her heel, and she hid the pain, and she squeezed her foot into the shoe, and she went out to the prince. And he was excited. "Oh, goody, you're my princess. Isn't it wonderful?" And he took her out to his horse, and he put her up on the horse, and he started to ride back to the castle. Well, they got past the tree, and the tree rustled, and the dove flew out and flew alongside the horse, and the prince watched the dove and saw the blood trickling out of the slipper, and he knew that this girl had tried to trick him too. So he turned her right around and took her right back to her father. Well, when they got back to the house, he said, "This one's not the right one either. Haven't you got any other girls in this house?" And the father said, "Well, I mean, Cinderella's my daughter, but, well, she can't be the one. She didn't go to the ball. She stayed home and she was, I don't know, cooking or cleaning or something." And the prince said, "I wish to see her." "Oh, but she can't be the one I wish to see her." "Yes, Your Highness." And they called for Cinderella. And she washed her face, and she washed her hands, and she combed her hair, and she came out to see the prince. And the prince gave her the slipper, and she slipped it onto her foot, and she reached into her pocket, and she brought out the other slipper, and she slipped it onto her other foot, and when she stood up, the prince recognized her. He said, "Of course, how could I have been so blind? Of course, Cinderella, you are my princess." And he took her out to his horse, and he put her up on the horse, and they rode back to the palace. And as they passed the tree, there was a rustling in the tree, and the dove flew out and landed on Cinderella's shoulder and rode there all the way back to the castle. And Cinderella and the prince were married, and her stepsisters and her stepmother were banished from the court, never to see Cinderella again. And that is the story of Cinderella as told by the Brothers Grimm. So, tune back in on Friday at about 3 o'clock here on the Milledgeville Public Library IL Facebook page. I will be telling another story. Perhaps we'll tell the Chinese version of Cinderella. It's called Ye Shen. Come back on Friday at 3 o'clock, and you'll be hearing the story of Ye Shen from China. We will see you all then, and I hope you enjoyed it.